Excellent!
So yesterday, NVIDIA launched their GeForce GTX 1080 Ti, continuing their time-honored tradition of making a faster GPU with a Ti on the end. I have a set of benchmarks at 4K and 1440 with overclocking included for you guys today, but first let's plow through the requisite specs and pricing info. This is the 1080 Ti Founders Edition, the reference design from NVIDIA essentially, and they are not charging $100 extra for it this time. The Founders Edition and third-party designs, which are expected in April, will have a base price of $700, and third-party designs will probably go up from there depending on how premium they are. The GTX 1080 price is dropped to $500 meanwhile, and somehow all of this seems relatively affordable. That is, if your relatives happen to be rich and willing to give you money to buy high-end graphics cards. NVIDIA claims that the 1080 Ti is 35% faster than the 1080, and we're going to find out for sure in just a moment when we get to the benchmarks. As for specs, the 1080 Ti is based on the 16nm Pascal architecture. It uses the GP102 GPU specifically, which is the same one that's used in the Titan XP, and it sports 3,584 CUDA cores across 28 streaming multiprocessors. The GPU itself has 12 billion transistors and a larger die size than the 1080 at 471 square millimeters. There's 11 gigabytes of GDDR5X memory by way of 11 32-bit memory controllers for a sort of odd 352-bit bus width. And the VRAM has also been refined even further by NVIDIA and their partners to run at 11 gigabits per second. The TDP for the card is 250 watts. A 600 watt power supply is recommended for your whole system and the card, and the Founders Edition requires one 6-pin and one 8-pin PCI Express power connector. Physically, the Founders Edition 1080 Ti looks pretty much the same as the Founders Edition 1080, with the die-cast aluminum shroud and blower-style fan, although it does have a completely redesigned PCB and power delivery system. Also, there are only 4 display outs on the back, 3 DisplayPort, and 1 HDMI 2.0. You lose a DVI out, but NVIDIA did include a DP to DVI adapter, at least in their retail packaging. The upshot is that there's a lot more space back there that's cleared for the card's exhaust for hot air to escape. The card measures 10.5 inches long, and so it should fit in smaller systems where overbuilt third-party designs might not. For today's benchmarks, I'm comparing an overclocked GTX 1080 Strix edition from Asus with the 1080 Ti, both in its stock and me overclocked configurations. The test bed is my perfect RGB system back there that I built a month or two ago with an i7 7700K running at 4.9 GHz, 32 gigs of G.Skill Trident Z RGB memory at 3000 MHz, an Asus Maximus 9 Hero motherboard, NZXT Kraken X62 CPU cooler, 750 watt EVGA Supernova G2 power supply, and an OCZ Toshiba RD400 1TB NVMe SSD, all in a Phanteks Enthoo-Evolved tempered glass case. So taking a look at GPU frequencies first, you can see my overclock on the 1080 Strix, which hit about 2088 MHz on the GPU core max, leveling out to about 2062 when temperatures increased under load. The 1080 Ti at stock is much more conservative with the base and boost clocks, but GPU boost hit 1848 max. Unfortunately, it falls off quite a bit under load, averaging about 1620 in my testing. I used EVGA Precision X OC to overclock the 1080 Ti, managing to hit 11,400 megabits per second on the memory and 2088 MHz max GPU frequency. But again, that dropped down to the mid to low 1900s, about 1936 on average, after the GPU heated up. So here's a look at my benchmarks with all 3 GPU configurations. So if it's not immediately obvious, the 1080 Ti is very fast and significantly faster than the 1080. The game tested matters quite a bit, of course. The scores were very much closer in a more CPU-limited game like Civ 6, for example, but the 1080 Ti is undeniably the fastest graphics card now available, unless you count the Titan XP, which according to Jay, it still beats most of the time. The only faults to be found with the 1080 Ti are if you actually take NVIDIA's 35% faster claim seriously, and if you look a little bit more closely at thermals. I suppose the price as well, but we've already talked about that. Overall, in my test, the overclocked 1080 Ti was about 21% faster than the overclocked 1080 Strix. You can see that 35% number in some games, and if you're comparing stock speeds between the cards, or especially if you compare the stock 1080 to an overclocked 1080 Ti. But I think if you are seeing disappointment there, it was mainly just because NVIDIA overpromised just a bit. For temps though, I hit 80, 85, and 90°C respectively max temperature, and the GPU boost throttling is definitely a factor with the 1080 Ti when the temperatures start to creep up. For this reason, I will sum up by saying that I think you should wait until April for the third-party 1080 Ti's to see what can be done to achieve higher clock speeds and better thermals. The Founders Edition here is great for small form factor builds and for system integrators, but for DIY builders, I think one of the really cool looking 1080 Ti designs, which are already starting to be teased by some third-party manufacturers, will be a better bet. Finally, here's the bang for your buck slide, frames per dollar across all my game tests, and even at $700 MSRP, the 1080 Ti is still keeping it in the $160 to $180 range. Just FYI, the actual Strix 1080 that I used costs about $550 right now, but since most 1080s can OC pretty well, I left the MSRP of $500 on there, so that would be a little bit less on the dollars per frame performance if I was charging it $550, which you would actually have to pay for it. Obviously, the 1080 Ti is for people with deeper pockets, but it is nice to know that you're not paying too much of a premium for the top-end GPU in NVIDIA's stable. And that is all for my 1080 Ti review, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, of course, please make sure to hit that like button on your way out. Links to cards and other things like my store down in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.